With my channel, I've always aimed to talk about random Japanese games I've picked up over the years, and yet despite this, I've covered like 2, maybe 3, and random doesn't really describe those ones either. So to make up for that, we're going to add to the count with a game so obscure that I think I'm unintentionally labeling myself as the English expert on the subject, just by making this video. Seriously, other than a few unfinished Let's Plays from yesteryear, I think I'm it. So, let's have fun with it. Rimococoron was developed by Sony Computer Entertainment Inc., now known as Sony Interactive Entertainment, in 2001. And yes, that does mean that this is technically an original Sony IP. And yet, when PlayStation All-Stars rolled around, where was the representation? The name is a play on words with the Japanese words for remote control, Rimocon, and heart, Kokoro, which is a name that may or may not make sense when we get to the gameplay. But first off, a bit of background. There's a borderline non-existent amount of info on the game in English, and the Japanese side of things aren't actually much better. Being released in 2001 probably has a lot to do with that, as there just wouldn't have been nearly as much coverage going around at the time. But this isn't just some random game, it's actually kinda notable for 2 reasons. The first being that it was developed by the same team that worked on Parappa the Rapper and Vibrabin. Well, apparently. It's noted as such on the Japanese Wikipedia page, and I'd believe it from the final product. But I was unable to verify this in any real way. So an interesting mystery there. The other reason is that they invited on board a special guest character designer in Kenichi Nakane. Doesn't ring a bell? Yeah, he's not exactly prolific to a Western audience, and I certainly had never heard of him, but it seems he was a big enough deal to be the game's main selling point. And from what I can tell, he mostly works on promotional stuff for events and local areas and such, but also gained a lot of popularity being the artist for a quiz show, IQ Supplement. But all of that appears to be well after Rimococoron's time, so I don't know what he was known for beforehand. Either way, he's important enough to have a hyperlinked name on Wikipedia, even if it doesn't go anywhere. And that's gotta count for something. It seems to be a project that he looks quite fondly upon, as he brings it up on social media every once in a while. In a sea of 3D games or pixel art, Kenichi's character design was likely a departure from what was commonly seen at the time, making for a very striking first impression for the game. And yeah, that's kind of it for information on its development. It was potentially made by a notable Sony Interactive team and had a special guest artist working on it. Not really a lot to go on, but even just those 2 factors piqued my interest, and I was not disappointed. In the marketing, when asked what genre Rimococoron was, a spokesperson replied that it was a meddling simulator. A very accurate representation. You see, the game presents you with a scenario, let's say a family sitting down to eat dinner. You are essentially looking in at this as an omniscient viewer, able to look all around the scene, zooming in to get small details and just see it all happening. You can't interact with the scene directly, but instead you're given the ability to telepathically implant ideas in living creatures' heads. So for instance, you can snapshot the idea of this picture of the family's grandmother and send it to the grandfather. This in turn makes him remember his presumably deceased wife, and he sheds a few tears. And for that, you get some chokai, which I like to localize as medals. You know, like medals, but spelt like meddling? Alright, I'll just keep calling them chokai. But pretty much the whole game is just making these little interactions happen. Sometimes it's small innocuous things, like the example earlier, or sometimes you'll affect the scene in some way, like making the father open the window because it's gotten too hot. It's a very interesting concept, and quite unlike anything I've seen before. The game makes no attempt at explaining this either, so unless you've got the admittedly very stylish and fancy manual, you just have to kind of press buttons until you figure out how the game works. Speaking from experience, that is. I was flailing around for a good while before I swallowed my pride and got to reading. Your actual goal in each level is to trigger what is known as the Big Chikai, which is essentially a big event that affects the majority of the scene in a major way. For instance, in the shopping district level, the Big Chikai is the local onsen catching on fire, causing an emergency evacuation and firefighters to arrive. If you trigger that event before the timer runs out, you clear the stage, and if you run out of time, you have to try again. You can also get a fail state if you don't collect enough small Chikai before the end of the stage, but in my experience that is typically hard to do unless you're speedrunning through a level. It's worth noting that going in with the goal of actively figuring out how to trigger the Big Chikai is not the way to play. As in the example of the onsen fire, you have no idea that's what you're aiming for. There's a hint or two that you can see if you're particularly observant, but even then you can't exactly work backwards. The fire is started by a man who has his hair catch fire after lighting some birthday candles, on the other side of the level. And he doesn't even show up until you've achieved other arbitrary things in the level first. So you really do just have to work on the smaller stuff in the hopes that you stumble across the right things to make it happen. I actually found that in one level there are 2 Big Chikai events that can be triggered, so quite possibly other levels have that too. Future Apple chiming in here, I can confirm that each level does indeed have 2 endings. Just a bit earlier I mentioned that if you don't have enough Chikai when you trigger the end of the level, you'll get a stage over fail state. This is what determines how the Big Chikai plays out, and usually results in the event fizzling out before affecting the whole stage. Again, I found it hard to make this happen on accident, though they're fun little alternative events to see, so worth the effort for those curious enough. But it's really hard to get a feel for the game without giving it a crack, so why don't I take you through the zoo level to see what kind of nonsense shenanigans we can get up to. You as the viewer also have the added bonus of avoiding all the extended periods of not knowing what to do next, so enjoy that luxury. So here's the zoo. As you can tell, there's a lot going on at once. We have a man sleeping on a bench having a bad dream, we have a very popular panda enclosure with a boy throwing a tantrum, we have a staff member pacing the hippo enclosure seemingly looking for something, a petting pen with a lot going on at once, another staff member also looking for something, 2 ladies at the lion enclosure and a whole bunch of animals, and you get the point. Frankly, it's a lot to take in at first glance, but we gotta start somewhere, so why not start with the guy sleeping? His dream involves getting hit by a car and getting chased by a lion. We could try to read into this, but there's no need, as he happens to be right next to the Baku enclosure. If you've never heard of a Baku before, that's quite fair, as they are Japanese mythological creatures based off the real Malayan tapir, with their food choice being dreams. You might know them as inspiration for certain characters in Animal Crossing or Pokemon. But mythology lesson aside, it's the perfect animal for our purposes. So we tell the Baku about the nearby dream, and it is more than happy to shoop it up, waking the man up as a result. His relief at it all being a dream is short-lived, however, as he is immediately charged into a runaway boar and shot flying into the lion enclosure. Understandably upset, the lion begins to chase him around, but with a quick suggestion to escape via the tree, our hero makes it out, accidentally has his pants drop down, and then gets arrested for being a pervert. A great result all round. But that's the end of that scenario, since everyone's now left the scene, so next stop is the guy with the hippo. He seems to be looking for something, so finding that seems to be the way to go. If you look closely and wait, the hippo will yawn, revealing a purse hiding in its mouth. Directing the staff member to it, we get him to use a broom to retrieve it, much to his delight. This causes the hippo to spit out at a nearby rubbish bin, causing a mess for a certain staff member. Next to that is an elephant who has a strong sense of justice, so we can get him to help us clean up. And you get the idea. These levels can seriously be quite long and do require a lot of trial and error. But long story short, we get this kid to climb a tree, a giraffe saves him, this guy gets teased by a parrot for his love life, this couple then also gets harassed by the parrot, this worker recaptures this girl who is actually a tanuki, this peacock tries to woo this lady who in turn causes this couple to have a spat, these monkeys have some family drama and get teased by these people with a banana, the banana peel ends up on the floor and our friend from earlier picks it up. And now, and only now, we can actually trigger the Big Chikai. For whatever reason, picking up the banana peel was the thing that needed to happen to get these 2 delinquents to appear. These 2 workers from earlier at the lion enclosure are nearby saying how proud they are of their hard work, while the delinquents are just bagging on the zoo right next to them. And despite how the term depressing is quite an apt description for Japanese zoos, it is a bit overblown for this lovely fictional one. alert the workers to the sheer disrespect, and one of them decides to deal with the situation appropriately. Yeah, apparently the zoo just had a terrifying T-Rex on hand, which naturally the patrons aren't too fond of. And rightly so, because it very quickly beelines to the delinquents to both eat and crush them, which is just straight up murder from this guy. But we will ignore that, because the chaos of this does indeed qualify as a stage-altering event, so that's a stage clear! At the end of each level, you're presented with a list of potential interactions, with the ones you've never done obscured. You might be given a silhouette to help you figure out the main character involved as a hint though. And what's interesting is that each character in this game is given a little bio, which I find quite fun. There are allegedly 200 different characters in the game, which honestly feels like a bit of a stretch, but I'm also not going to go counting them all, so let's just say that's true. On this screen, it also shows your high score, meaning you can try and top it in future runs of the level. Certain interactions are worth more Chikai than others, so you can compare to figure out which outcome will net you a higher score, or which interactions are worth doing before others to ensure you get the most bang for your buck. It's a neat way to encourage replayability, but personally I just find getting through the level is more than enough. Neat though. And like I said, there's not a lot of info on this game, but I was able to do a bit of digging around the release of the game. The notably recorded one being a set of stalls in Lafayette, Harajuku, where people could try out various levels of the game. The stalls were set up to mimic areas from the levels, blending real-life objects with cardboard cutouts, and a lot of effort seemed to go into it. After playing, you could fill out a questionnaire and receive a free t-shirt, which naturally I did a bit of digging on, and at first I thought it was this grey shirt with the black cat from the game on it. And I was like, neat, that's a free shirt, yes sir. And then I found this shirt. When, without ever considering that there were just multiple shirts given away, I got to trying to figure out which of these was the giveaway shirt. My main lead being that the attendant in the photos at the promo event seemed to be wearing a similar shirt as the one with the motorcyclist on it. So naturally I just assumed, so the cat one was the one that was given away and the other one was for staff. Mystery solved. Yeah, I found a picture of her from the front and she's wearing a completely different shirt. So the long and the short of it is, here's all the shirts that I found. Courtesy of one of Kenichi's Twitter posts from just last May, it seems that even the shirts the staff were wearing were designs that were up for grabs. So yeah, I think they were all just available, which is a bit of a boring answer, but is also quite impressive, not gonna lie. That's a lot of options for a free giveaway. But it does show us two interesting notes. One, going down random rabbit holes of merch is pointless but fun. And two, the art style of the game pretty much overshadowed any concept of the gameplay in the marketing. Likewise, I also found a set of clocks, stickers, stuffed toys, and a soundtrack stationery combined thing, so it really was all just about Kenichi's art. And hey, that's where the heart of its charm is, so that makes sense. And bar going through the entire game bit by bit for you, that's everything there is to know about Rimococoron. At least that's everything that I could find. Watch there be way more information or other such things be in plain sight, with me just missing them with some lame attempt at research. This is my first time having to hunt down information on a game in Japanese as well, so no doubt this is just an amateur take on doing that. But hey, I'm happy to give Rimococoron what little of a boost I can in the public zeitgeist, and I had a lot of fun doing it. I've uploaded a playthrough of each level over on a new channel I made for this kind of thing, so if you want to play through the game yourself, those can act as a walkthrough of sorts if you get stuck. Hopefully that can make it a bit easier than it has been for English speakers to get through the whole game. But as it stands, I know everything there is to know about Rimococoron, and now you do too.